Hey, thanks for clicking on the video. So the first thing I did on this project was cut these templates out on my laser. I got the files from MakerWorld for free. They do more 3D printing stuff, but they have some 2D things, and I edited this because it just had the coffin shape and light burn. I'll link the MakerWorld site if you're interested in getting them. And the great thing about this project is you can use some of those cutoffs that you can't seem to throw away. Here I have a couple pieces of red oak. So I took those over to the jointer and I got one straight edge on them. I will add that these pieces are just over 3/4 at around 13/16 of an inch thick. And then on the somewhat more unusable piece, I ripped the outside edge off to get down to some good wood. And then I set the saw at 13/16, so that way I'll have four 13/16 inch squares. And then I set my blade height to 1/4 of an inch and moved my fence in also to 1/4 of an inch. And then I cut a shallow dado in each piece and rotated it so that I cut an L shape essentially in the ends of these things. Once I got that done, because I needed that dado to be slightly wider, I moved the fence in just slightly to facilitate the thickness of those inserts. And then here you can see kind of what I have going on. And now I can slide in the insert and set the two sides on, and the pieces are long enough that I can cut some off and use it as the top piece, and it'll already have the dado cut into it. Here I'm just getting that measurement. So then on my crosscut sled I got the stop set up and I cut the first piece. I went and tested that to make sure it was indeed the right length, and it was, so I went ahead and cut the rest of them. With those four pieces done, I could move on to cutting the length on the sides. I marked that out and then reset the stop on the crosscut sled and then just cut those four pieces. So now I can move on to gluing this up. And I thought about sticking some small dowels in here, but alignment was going to be difficult, or maybe just some brad nails in it. But I opted for just straight glue. A lot of people think that end grain to long grain is really weak, and it is to a certain extent, but it's stronger than we think it is. So I went ahead and just glued this thing up as is. So I'm gluing one side up as you see, and then I'll glue another set up exactly like that. I'm not going to assemble the whole box at this point. That would be kind of difficult. I'll let this glue set up before I further assemble it. So now while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'll get some measurements. It turns out that this is 4 13/16 and my extra piece is about 6.5, so that'll give me some room for overhang on the top and the bottom. So then I got the fence set up on the table saw so that I have just over 3/4 of an inch overhang, and I ripped the piece down. As far as the crosscut goes, I know a lot of people feel way more comfortable with a miter gauge. At this point, I have enough registered against the fence. I'm using a push block. I'm keeping good inward pressure against the fence as I make this cut, and I'm comfortable with it. And now to give the top some character, I'm basically cutting a chamfer on it. The angle is very arbitrary. I didn't really even make note of what it was. I just eyeballed it and it looked visually appealing to me. I'm using this setup to make this cut where the piece is fully supported. You would not want to do this just with the fence alone on a piece this size especially. This could go bad in a big hurry. So now, because the lid still seemed a little bit too plain to me, I cut another square and I'm going to create a step with another chamfered piece that I'll glue on the top. Again, I'm using this jig in order to make this cut as safely as possible. On a small piece like this, it's even more dangerous, so I'm trying to be very cautious. I will add that I cut another piece before I change the saw setup that'll create the bottom that has the chamfer the same as the original top piece, and that way that'll give the lower part a little bit more character as well. Once I got that piece cut, it was time for a bunch of sanding. I did not record that. You're welcome. And now I'll get this thing glued up. The lid tried to squirm around quite a bit like they tend to do, but I finally got it aligned and clamped down. With that done, it had been long enough on these side pieces that I felt comfortable with taking those out of clamps and gluing up the other two top pieces and making this thing more of a box. Then I left for a while and cut firewood, hence the reason I'm a little more dirty than I was before. But I stopped when I was out cutting and picked up a couple battery-powered tea lights at Dollar General for $2. I cut this small square for the bottom because I felt like it needed a little more support. The piece I had wasn't a whole lot bigger, so the little corner notches I had to take out of it won't be very much glue surface, but it'll be strong enough for what I want it to be. And then over at the drill press, I had marked center, and I got a Forstner bit out that's just slightly larger than that tea light. I'll get this hole drilled out, and that will keep that tea light from floating around the inside of this project. And now I can get that insert piece glued in. And again, there's very little glue surface on this, I realize that, but this is just to keep the lower part of the legs from moving around too much. There won't be virtually any strain on this thing. It's just enough to hold that tea light in place and keep the legs from kind of wandering. While I wait for this glue to set up, to keep the project moving, I have these small rare earth magnets, and I'm going to inset those into the lower part of these legs. The whole concept behind this is I want this base to be removable, and the panel inserts that go in there will be interchangeable. So I could slide out the, say, Halloween ones that I'm doing now, and I could laser out some Thanksgiving or Christmas ones and slide those in there, and that way this thing's kind of universal. And now it's been a few hours and I've got cleaner clothes on, but I set up a square and I have the bottom, and I'm going to get this thing registered in the center. I'll get that marked and then move on to getting the magnets inset into the base. And the way I go about locating the magnets is to use some acrylic paint. I put just a little dab on each of the magnets, and I kind of made a mess of this because a lot more paint came out than it should have. The smart way would probably be put a little paint on a piece of cardboard and use a Q-tip just to dab a little bit on there. So I kind of went in with a shotgun approach here, but it still got the job done, and I could locate where those magnets need to land. With those spots clearly marked with the black paint, I can go ahead and use a brad point drill bit and countersink some shallow holes. Once I get that done, I can use some CA glue and get the rare earth magnets in position, making sure to check the polarity multiple times to make sure that I get the magnets actually sticking to each other and not repelling. With that all done, I can set that aside and let the CA glue dry. And now I can get the top glued on. And because of that chamfer I put on there, it's going to be a slight bit of a clamping challenge. So I'm going to use some wood glue on the long grain, and on the end grain I'm just going to put a dab of CA glue on there and use some activator and use that as a temporary clamp to get this thing glued up. Because it's raining outside, unfortunately I have to use the CA glue inside again, but I do try to use that outdoors because of the fumes. And then just like that, I have an instant bond. And if you note on one of the corners, I drew a little Sharpie line on there, and that is because on the base, I want to make sure that the magnets are all aligned. They're slightly offset a tiny bit on the legs, so that way there is an arrangement in which this thing goes. And now I'm going to cut the transparent sheets that'll go behind the inserts. And I picked those up off Amazon, and they're actually kind of ridiculously cheap. I have enough extra to make probably 50 of these lanterns, but I'm going to size them using the inserts themselves and just trimming along the outside. After I get them all trimmed, I spend an embarrassingly long time trying to figure out how to get the protective film off the sheet, but I eventually get it. And then I can slide the insert and the sheet in. They're a little snug. I'll need to sand just slightly on the outside of the insert so that it fits a little bit looser. So then eventually I did get the film off the rest of the sheets and get all 4 of the inserts in. It took a while, and I hadn't even realized yet that there's film on the other side of it, which I'll have to do later, but I'll get to that. Anyhow, one thing I will note is that I don't get much back for comments on these, and I would love it if you guys would leave a comment and let me know what you think, if there's anything I should improve upon. I would appreciate any feedback. And now I'll just get this tea light turned on and insert it into the box and see what this thing looks like. And so far, I'm really happy with how this is turning out. And now I'm going to put a hook on the top so I can actually hang the lantern. I've marked center, and I'll use an awl to mark the center so that the drill doesn't wander, but I'll get a pilot hole in this and get the hook installed. And now all that's left to do is put some finish on it. I've opted for Danish oil just because the ease of putting it on, I can wipe it on. I should have maybe used natural. I feel like I would have liked it better if I just did a clear finish on it. But I opted for a walnut Danish oil to darken it up a little bit. I'm not sure if I like it better or not. Let me know what you think. Should I have left it natural or did the walnut? Which is better? With that done, I went ahead and eased the edges of the inserts so they fit a little nicer, and figured out that there was film on the other side of the transparent sheets and got that off after a while. And now I can just put the thing back together and see what it looks like. And then the last thing is just to get the light in it, and you can see what this thing looks like. For a one-day build, it's not too bad, I think. Let me know what you think. Do you like the design with the magnets and the fact that I can change out the panels? I hope you do. If you don't, hey, let me know either way. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.